What if the most important doctrine in Christianity was decided centuries after Jesus? One of the most important questions in Christian history is whether the beliefs that later became official church doctrine truly reflected Jesus' original teachings. This question becomes especially significant when examining the Council of Nicaea, a gathering of bishops convened in 325 AD under the authority of the Roman Emperor Constantine. When we read the Gospels, we find Jesus repeatedly speaking about God as someone distinct from himself. He prayed to God, worshipped God, thanked God, and taught others to worship God. He described himself as one who had been sent by God and who carried out God's will. He consistently pointed people toward obedience to God and emphasized the importance of serving and loving God with all one's heart. Many of the people who encountered Jesus during his ministry regarded him as a prophet. The Gospels record numerous occasions where he was identified as a prophet by the crowds. Like the prophets before him, he called people to repentance, challenged religious hypocrisy, performed miracles by God's permission, and conveyed a message that he claimed came from God rather than from himself. Yet, 3 centuries after Jesus, Christian leaders gathered at Nicaea to settle a dispute concerning his nature. The central issue was whether Jesus was fully equal to God or whether he was subordinate to God. One side, represented by Arius and his supporters, argued that God alone is eternal and without beginning. According to this view, Jesus was uniquely created by God and exalted above all creation, but he was not equal to God himself. The opposing side argued that Jesus shared the same divine essence as God and was eternal in the same way as God. After intense debate, the council adopted a creed supporting this position and condemned the teachings of Arius. A critical examination of this event raises several important questions. If Jesus intended to teach that he was equal to God, why did this issue remain controversial for nearly 3 centuries after his ministry? Why was there such widespread disagreement among Christian leaders who had inherited the traditions of earlier generations? If the doctrine were clearly taught by Jesus himself, one might expect far less uncertainty among those closest to the early Christian movement. Another question concerns the language used at Nicaea. The council employed philosophical terms that are not found in the recorded sayings of Jesus. Concepts such as sharing the same substance or essence were products of theological debate rather than direct quotations from Jesus. Critics argue that this represents a shift from the simple language of prophecy to the complex language of philosophy. The role of Emperor Constantine also invites scrutiny. Constantine's primary concern was political unity. Religious disputes threatened stability within the Roman Empire, and he sought to bring an end to divisions among Christians. Critics question whether an emperor should have played such a significant role in matters of theology. They argue that religious truth should be determined by evidence and revelation rather than political considerations. The council's decision did not end the controversy. For decades afterward, disagreements continued throughout the Christian world. Bishops were removed from office, exiled, restored, and exiled again depending on changes in political power. This prolonged conflict suggests that the council's conclusions were far from universally accepted. When examining the teachings attributed to Jesus, critics of Nicaea point to numerous passages in which Jesus distinguishes himself from God. He speaks of God's knowledge being greater than his own in certain matters. He declares that he can do nothing by himself, but only what God enables him to do. He teaches people to pray to God rather than to himself. He repeatedly emphasizes that his authority comes from God. These statements appear consistent with the role of a prophet who serves God faithfully and conveys God's message to humanity. Critics argue that such passages are difficult to reconcile with later theological claims that place Jesus on the same level as God. Supporters of Nicaea interpret these passages differently and argue that they must be understood alongside other texts. Nevertheless, the existence of such extensive debate demonstrates that the issue was not as straightforward as later generations sometimes assume. A broader historical question emerges from this discussion. Should the beliefs of a religious community be defined primarily by the teachings of its founder? Or can later councils and theological developments legitimately expand upon those teachings? Nicaea represents a moment when church leaders exercised authority to define doctrine in a way that would shape Christianity for centuries to come. From a critical perspective, the council can be seen as a turning point at which theological interpretation became increasingly influenced by philosophical concepts and institutional authority. The simple message of devotion to God, obedience to His commands, and moral reform became intertwined with complex discussions about divine nature and metaphysical substance. The significance of Nicaea lies not only in the creed it produced, but also in the precedent it established. It demonstrated that church councils could define official doctrine and that alternative views could be declared heretical. This transformed the nature of religious authority within Christianity and influenced the development of Christian theology for generations. Whether one views Nicaea as a defense of truth or as a departure from the original message of Jesus depends largely on how one interprets the evidence. What remains undeniable is that the Council played a decisive role in shaping the beliefs of millions of Christians and altering the course of religious history. The central question continues to resonate today. Did Jesus intend to be understood as equal to God, or did later generations elevate his status beyond what he taught about himself? The Council of Nicaea represents one of history's most influential attempts to answer that question, and its conclusions continue to be debated nearly 17 centuries later.